Welcome to the Pet Loss Companion. I'm Ken Dolan-Del Vecchio, and I'm here with my friend and co-author and colleague, Nancy Saxton-Lopez. And this is a program that we do live on Facebook and YouTube every Thursday at 6 o'clock Eastern Time. And then it's available for replay on those outlets. And it's also available shortly thereafter on a whole bunch of different podcast outlets as an audio only replay. So we do this program because we want to take the information that we gathered over many years, decades, in fact, three plus decades in Nancy's case, facilitating pet loss support groups. And we put that into our book, The Pet Loss Companion: Healing Advice from Family Therapists Who Lead Pet Loss Groups. Well, because of this technology that's now available, we're able to give some of the learning that we gained over all those years to a broader audience. And so we're very happy to be with you, and we encourage you to dialogue with us. So please send us your questions, your comments, your suggestions for topics, your suggestions for guests. And we try to respond to absolutely everybody who writes to us. You can reach me at kenddv@gmail.com. You can reach Nancy at nsaxtonlopez, that's nsaxtonlopez at csmpc.com. And we like people to know that this program is a friend of Dakin Humane Society in Springfield, Massachusetts. Dakin is a 501c3 community supported animal welfare organization that provides a wealth of services, including shelter and medical care and spay-neuter services and behavioral rehab for more than 20,000 animals and people each year. It was opened in 1969, and since then it has become one of the most recognized nonprofit organizations in central Massachusetts and a national leader in animal welfare. You can learn more about Dakin, and it would be great if you could make a donation at dakinhumane.org. That's DAKINHUMANE.org. You can also make a donation to support the work that we're doing with this podcast by clicking the link that's in the description and subscribing. And also, it would be great if you could like and subscribe to the program on YouTube. So I'll stop there, Nancy, and hand it to you.
Well, we have a lot to talk about tonight,
Me too.
but I am a little sad today because 18, 19 years ago, we got Rosie, and the year after Jack, and they were little black pugs from two different places, and they had babies, which was not planned. But they had Eddie, Hank, Molly, Gracie, and Rocky. And unfortunately, Gracie died last night. And so it's my grand dog, even though she was with a lovely family, but she was 15, and it was sad. And Hank has passed on, Rosie's passed on, and Molly has passed on. So, but just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, my condolences. That's really hard.
Yeah. So I wanted to share. But we do have a kind of an interesting question that we're going to talk about tonight from Mike and Sam.
Yep. So even before we do that, I want to thank Grant
Yes.
who sent us his wonderful book,
Thank
which
you.
is called Muggins. Thank you so much, Grant. The Life and Afterlife of a Canadian Canine War Hero. And it looks like it's going to be a wonderful read. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I certainly will. And we thank Grant very much for the wonderful gift. And it's a signed copy. And we also thank Grant for just being so connected to our program and dialoguing with us over some time. So we want to get to a question that was sent to us by Mike and his wife, Sam. And so I'm going to read this so we can get the question out and the details out in a really precise fashion. So this is a note from Mike. My wife, Sam, and I are now at the point in our two pets' lives, our Bichon, Colonel, who is 16 and a half years old, and our small poodle, Toby, who is around 17, when euthanasia is a daily conversation.
Mhm.
Toby is nearly blind and completely deaf and has been for approximately a year or so. So he can no longer get up on the couch or climb steps. Furthermore, he has bouts of whining when he's sitting on my lap. So I have to guess what his needs are. Does he want to be put on the floor to get a drink? Does he need to go outside? Neither Toby nor Colonel use the doggy door anymore. Or if he's on my lap, does he wish to be placed on his blanket or on our couch? And if he's on our couch and he begins to whine, does he wish to be sitting on my lap? So it's really hard to figure out what he's asking for. We rescued Toby from a dog pound along the Arizona-Mexico border back in November of 2006. At the time, the staff stated they thought he was about a year and a half old. Toby has a great appetite, drinks water, goes to the bathroom regularly, oftentimes in our house, however, and looks forward to his daily walks. Colonel is the most special dog I've ever had. Came into our lives at 8 weeks of age in December of 2005. At 16 and a half years old, however, he has developed what our vet, who Mike and Sam make a point of saying is absolutely fantastic, has diagnosed as osteoarthritis in his
Mhm.
right leg and shoulder, causing him to limp constantly. No signs of osteosarcoma, so no signs of cancer. A couple weeks back, he began having a hacking cough along with an elevated temperature. Our vet, after reviewing radiology films and comparing to ones taken 4 weeks prior, thought she saw a nodule on his lung. She wasn't sure if it was cancer, and given his elevated temp, decided it may also be an infectious
Mhm.
process. She gave him an injection of an antibiotic and a steroid and sent us home. The next day, Colonel's fever was gone. His elevated respiratory rate was normal, and the cough had pretty much resolved. After a couple of weeks on oral antibiotics, prednisone, and a pain reliever, he's completely back to normal, with the exception of his limping on that right front leg. Because of that, our daily walks are very limited
Mhm.
to just going outside to the bathroom. However, he too now pees and at times defecates in the house. His appetite is great. He drinks a ton of water. Other than that, he simply sleeps all the time, similar to Toby. My wife and I know it's getting close to that day for both Toby and Colonel. In fact, when Colonel had that coughing episode, which may have indicated cancer, and it still may, who knows, I went out into my frozen backyard in Colorado, dug through the snow and ice to create his burial spot in anticipation of what lie ahead. Our angst and why I'm writing this is the question of euthanasia, respective to having both of our pets euthanized at the same time. As hard as that will be, it may even be more difficult to have to go through this twice, especially in light of the fact that we lost our 12-year-old cat, Stevie, suddenly on December 1st of last year. So very, very recently. What does the research say about this, if there is any? Have either of you ever been through this personally, or have you had others like us in the same boat? We are at a loss as to what to do. Both Colonel and Toby's quality of life has declined, as stated above, yet they're still eating, drinking, and sleeping a lot. He
So we
closes with, thanks for any advice or guidance you have for us, Mike and Sam Grill. So they have these two wonderful elderly dogs.
elderly dogs that they love so much, and they're watching, the natural progression
Yeah,
of, you know, things that happen physically to our animals as they get elderly, as they get
yeah,
older.
yeah,
And yes, I mean, I personally have never
no,
had that situation, to have I mean, I've had elderly dogs, but they haven't been in a situation as like this.
yeah.
So
Same with me. I've had elderly dogs and elderly cats, but not simultaneously seeming to be right at the point where we're having to make
the
that
decision
decision or thinking about making that
for
decision.
for 2 of them, right?
Mhm.
And, you know, it's an interesting dilemma. I mean, it's gotta be very gut-wrenching because, you know, you're waiting. You know how this goes, right? I
Yep,
mean, I was talking about my Jackie tonight who's having
yep,
trouble walking, and so, you know, you're going through this anxiety every day about, "Okay, when is this going to happen?"
yep.
Now, you know, I have clients and I, you know, use the quality of life scale for
Mhm,
dogs or
mhm.
cats, you know, and you know, to kind of guide people as to when euthanasia may be recommended.
Right.
And there are different categories. Um, you know, the Colonel and Toby are eating, and I think they're eating and they're
They're
sleeping a lot.
eating, they're
All elderly
drinking,
dogs
they're
do that.
sleeping a lot. All older dogs
Yeah,
sleep
sleep a lot.
a lot of the time, actually. That's been my experience. They just when they're not eating or drinking or engaged in a walk or some play activity, they conk out. That's been
Mhm.
I mean, dogs sleep a lot of the time anyway, right? They
Anyway,
spend a
but
lot of
they it
time sleeping.
certainly increases with age, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that what Mike had said that they're drinking. Now there are medical issues, and there is a mobility issue. I think it's with Colonel. I think, but you know, so I can understand their anxiety, you know, around who what's going to happen. And we've had situations, right? I think we had one last week that there were the cats, right? And they were all ill, but one all of a sudden got ill and died, and that wasn't the one that she
Was
was
expecting.
anticipating to
Yeah.
die. You know, so you know, it's
Well,
a
let's
good question.
yeah, let's first of all, we're not aware of research that
Right.
addresses this
We've
particular
never
dilemma.
seen any
So we
research.
just want to make that point clear. Secondly, we're going to go into another story that's similar, but I want to just give a couple of thoughts. One of them is I'm wondering if Mike and Sam are using doggy diapers because that might help to manage the fact that they're peeing and pooping
In the
all over the
house.
place. I mean, that's incredibly challenging when dogs
Oh yeah.
degrade their when they're not able to be house trained anymore. That's really very challenging. So if they're I assume they probably are, but I just want to mention those exist in case they're not using them and they're not they hadn't gotten that recommendation previously. The second thought that came to me when I was looking at their story is they have a very trusting relationship with their vet. And
Yeah.
they said their
Right.
vet is absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that I find myself doing when I'm in this such kind of a situation is I say to my vet, "What would you do if this were your dog?
Yeah.
What would you do?" And you get, in my experience, you get a very objective answer. He'll say, there, this is what I see in terms of functioning challenges. This is what I see in terms of the potential for longevity from this time on. This is what I see in terms of the question of whether or not they're suffering. And here's what I would do. And then my vets have said things like, but of course you have to make the decision because you
Of
love
course.
them.
Right.
But I have found that to be very useful because what I get is the most dispassionate clinical assessment and recommendation that I can believe in, that I can trust. And that's really, really important. And then the other thought that comes to mind for me is, and if these were my dogs, I would probably be thinking about them in very individual ways. Like I'd probably would be thinking about eh, and taking at them as individual cases. Like, where is Toby in the progression or the balance of suffering versus the pleasures of living? Is he
Right.
suffering more than he's experiencing the pleasures of living? Where is Colonel? And I would tend to look at it individually. And the reason that I think I would look at it individually is because I would be very concerned about euthanizing them together and then feeling bad that maybe one of them was in a different state and could have lived a bit longer with some degree of pleasure than the other one. So that would be those are my first thoughts, I guess I'd say, on this.
Well, and this is a unique situation, right? Because
Yeah.
I don't think it necessarily happens that often.
Right.
Although, when you have animals and you get them all at the same time, or you
Yep.
have babies like like Rosie and Jack did, and they were all about the same age, it didn't happen for me, but it has happened, I'm sure. I reached out last night. I talked to Mike and reached out to someone I worked a lot with over some time last year. And I asked her if I could share her story.
Mm-hmm.
And her name's Barbara. She's a lovely woman. And she had Penny and Petey, and she loved them desperately, and they loved her, and they were elderly. And
They were cats or dogs?
two dogs.
Two
Two
dogs.
dogs.
Okay.
One was, it's hard for me. I have their pictures here. I know one's a Cavalier, I believe,
Oh,
but the other
Cavalier.
one looks like a little kind of a Brussels Griffon. But Barbara, if you're listening, sorry, I don't remember exactly, but they're beautiful little dogs. They were beautiful little dogs. And so what happened is Barbara said, absolutely, you can use my story. And so I told her that we had gotten an email, and this was the dilemma, that this couple was, thinking of euthanizing both of their elderly dogs together, but they weren't sure. And so I'm going to read it because I couldn't say it any better than she could. Oh, how sad. Hi, Nancy. Please feel free to use my name, anything, hoping my situation can be a help in some way to another pet family. I'm very glad they passed together. She did choose to euthanize both of them together. I'm very glad they passed together on my lap, laying next to each other on their comfy bed. They were companions, so used to the other's presence all the time. The last 2 years, I wondered who was going to pass first, as they both had issues. I feel it would have been cruel for the one left behind. So old, confused without the other. Penny would have been gone in a month if she stayed behind just to give me comfort, and then me having to go through that again. I wrapped them up in their favorite blankets and buried them together. What I would do differently is spend time alone with them after they passed. A good amount of time to hold them, do whatever, cry, pray, be thankful for the gift of having them as long as I did. I did not take that time. I felt rushed because there were other people around. That's what her story is.
Yeah. So let me just add some comments from Mike. So Mike has been sending some comments. He says, thanks for helping us today. Our vet has even offered to come to our house when that day comes to do the euthanizing process. And he says, interestingly, Toby would be absolutely lost without Colonel. Colonel would be okay without Toby around, especially since we had Colonel for about a year before we found Toby. But it doesn't sound like that's an interesting situation. One needs the other, but one doesn't. I mean, I'm sure
It's
they
a
love
matter
each
of
other and
personality, right?
they're
So,
companions.
or different dogs, different breeds, different personalities,
But
and
for
that's exactly
Barbara,
what Barbara said, right?
yeah, but for
She,
Barbara, they were best friends. It sounds like
yes,
these
they
two
were
dogs.
connected,
Yeah.
right? So, I think it becomes a matter of personal choice. I don't
Hmm.
think it's a right or wrong answer. I think it's got to be, decided, between Mike, you, and Sam,
Hmm.
as to what you feel is the best thing to do with your veterinarian's, input. Um, and I understand. I mean, when we had Lulu and Fred, um, and Lulu had cancer, and Fred, they were both almost 15,
Hmm.
and pugs, pugs and Frenchies. And uh, we were told that Lulu would only last 6 months. And to the day, She had seizures and vomited, and we knew, and we took her to be euthanized. That day, Fred had licked her the entire day. He had never done that. And 3 months later, he had died. And I wrote in the book at Abby Glenn, I said, I know, Lulu, that you called him to come because they had been together for 15 years.
Yeah.
And so even though he had medical issues, we didn't believe to the point of euthanasia. However, she did, she did need euthanasia at that time. And then a few months later, he died. And so
Same with my Isabel and Abigail. Isabel died June 19th, the day before her 16th birthday, very precipitously, although she had been very sick and we were treating her for a few years for her congestive heart failure. She hadn't been in any particular escalation, just went into crisis and died. And then Abigail died August 24th.
Yeah.
So just a couple months later, very unexpectedly. I mean, she seemed to be in very stable health. We were not treating her for anything. She was over 16. Isabel was just about, as I said, to become 16. But it did seem, my husband Tim said that Abigail had just decided it was time to go.
Yeah.
That's the way it appeared.
Did Isabel call? I mean, I really believe that Lulu did not want to be alone without Judy.
But it's interesting when you describe Barbara. Barbara was so deliberate about this.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you said, which I would be concerned about with this euthanizing together, my question for myself would be, am I going to feel guilty that I made the decision to let them both go, and maybe it wasn't the right time for both of them? But she had worked this through, and she was absolutely certain. She experienced no guilt, which is rare under everything. It almost never happens under any circumstances, but she experienced no guilt because I think it sounds like she had talked it through so much that she was 100% certain this was the thing to do.
This was what they needed, right? Not what she needed, but what they needed.
Yeah. That's really the important way to put it. It was what they needed, and it would be suffering for either of them to
not be with the other,
and to continue without the other. And we don't know. It sounds like with Toby and Colonel, that's a little more in question. And also it's hard to know where they are in terms of their need to be released from their suffering, because they're still functioning.
Well, they are, yes. I mean, they're on the scale, probably. I mean, it doesn't appear that they're eating, they're drinking. Do they have better days or not? Some of the mobility, I think, for one of them is a little difficult, but that's been there for a while. Then are they in pain? It doesn't sound like there's pain, although limping, I don't know, if that would have some pain involved with that.
Yeah.
But those are kind of, are they happy? And it's hard to tell. And sometimes when they're elderly, because they do sleep so much. So you're thinking, are they just lethargic and don't want to be here? But that's pretty normal. So
can you mention the scale again? I know we've got it linked to earlier, the quality of life scale.
Well, there's many of them out there now. So the one, and I can't remember which one I use, but it's pretty simple. And I think it's under these, one of the big vet hospitals uses it. It was done many years ago by a veterinarian, but it talks about pain, mobility, good days or bad days, hydration, eating, Boogie's here, sorry. And I can't, what's the other one? I think there are only like 6.
Maybe you could send it to me.
Yeah, and you can put it
to
online.
Mike, and I'll post it. I'll put it as as a link on the description for this
Right.
program once you send it to me.
Absolutely. When we get off, and it's a scale from 1 to 10. So 10
Mhm.
being the worst, And so if you have over a 35, I think it's over a 35, then it's probably time. I mean, that's an indicator that there's many things going on.
Yeah.
So, and I think in some ways that's pretty helpful for people because
Yeah.
you don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
the idea of having some kind of dispassionate, objective measure can be helpful. I
yeah,
mean, and it also depends on your temperament, so that I tend to be more emotional than logical about these things, but it wouldn't hurt to have that, and that's
yes,
again why I would always ask if I trust the veterinarian who
right.
I'm working with, I would ask their opinion as well.
Yeah, I mean, the veterinarian really needs to be, included. Obviously, if hopefully that your veterinarian you do trust, I mean,
Yes.
that would
Yeah.
be helpful, obviously. And talk to people. I mean, there are a lot of, chat rooms and so forth, or websites or Facebook groups that can offer some information. I mean, you have to take some of that with a grain of salt, but you
Yep.
know, but
Yep.
that's
But one of the things I just want to say is it's really clear that Mike and Sam are very loving people
yes.
who
Of
give
course, they
so
love
much
their
to their
animals.
animal
Mhm.
companions, and that they're not going to go wrong no matter how
No.
they do this. They're not going to go wrong because they're people who operate from a place of deep caring and empathy and understanding. So I just want to make that point. There's no, they're get
There's no
whatever
right or
decision
wrong.
they make is going to be the right decision.
Exactly.
There's no two ways about that. And Mike is actually saying the scale would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate them reaching out to us.
Yep.
And this was a very important and interesting question.
Yeah.
And I mean, you look at it's not easy to make a euthanasia decision anyway,
No, never is
for
easy. No.
any animal at any
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
And to have two of them that are kind of in the same space, obviously that has more impact.
Yeah.
So we think
We
Mike.
thank you, and Nancy, I'll look forward to talking with you again next week.
Yes, indeed. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye bye.